Тогда стойте, пожалуйста, дальше.
Dear colleagues, please take up your seats. We shall now start our next session, and I have been given the pleasure, the honor to introduce our expert of today. And we met yesterday morning, and our expert is from Norway, Miss Mona Thowsen, dealing with the issues of corruption as it follows from the name of this session. And while I cannot go into the details, I have an anticipation that we're in for a very interesting initiative. Before I give the floor to the speaker, let me also repeat that the spirit of cooperation which unites the Moscow School and Norway is a great pleasure to me, because the Nordic countries and Norway, as a conspicuous example, are the true places to learn how we can contain and withstand corruption. So we cherish the visits of our Norwegian experts. I also believe that Mrs. Thowsen will give us a greater background about her and her project. Mona, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. This is, as I told you yesterday, I think this is a very unique forum, and it's unique to see people from so many constituencies come together in an enabling environment like this to discuss really tough challenges in society today, and I'm really happy to be able to contribute to that discussion. My name is Mona Thowsen, and I'm the Secretary General in Publish What You Pay Norway. Publish What You Pay Norway is a national chapter in the international network of Publish What You Pay, which consists of over 800 organizations from over 70 countries in the world, most of them from resource-rich countries in the south. I was asked to share my experiences and perspective from our work on corruption and capital flight in the extractive industries, and our work for transparency and accountability, and how we can bring that about. I'm just so curious, is there anybody else representing a civil society organization working on oil, gas, and mining in this group? Okay. There are two main challenges doing work in this area, I think. The first one is that the extractive industry, oil, gas, and mining, is one of the world's most powerful, richest, and most secretive industries in the world. And it affects both citizens, national governments, investors, researchers, and journalists. They're often in the same boat. And therefore, I think there would be an entry point for many of you into the discussion afterwards. And the second challenge is that it's necessary to see challenges in various disciplines, as economy, politics, law, media, accounting, in a larger context, to see how these disciplines work together and where there might be holes, and how these holes affect societies, citizens, the level of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. I'll come back to this. But first, in order to know how much money we're talking about in this industry, in 2001, the value of export of oil and minerals in Africa alone was worth $333 billion. This is nearly 7 times the amount of international aid, which was 48 billion, 7 times larger than international aid. To give you a perspective, I'm running some slides up here, and I'm told on that side too, so I hope that you can all see it. I'll give you an example of the Norwegian oil company Statoil. Statoil has been in Angola for over 10 years, and in that period they have paid around 90 billion Norwegian kroner in tax. So those of you who are very, very quick economists can quickly calculate that in your own currency. But in comparison, what Statoil paid to one country in tax is twice the amount as Norway gave in aid to the whole of Africa in the same period. Twice the amount. So this small picture is just to illustrate how large these revenues are. It creates enormous revenues, much, much more than aid. And aid will never be in that scale, and it's not even wanted. Nobody wants countries that are dependent on aid. So when we know that exploitation of non-renewable and finite resources, they are costly, risky, they're controversial, they make often irreversible interventions in nature, it's very important to get it right. And we have so many examples on what can happen when you don't get it right. For example, we know that 2/3 of the poorest people in the world, they actually live in resource-rich countries. And at the same time, the money it generates, it represents by far the largest value creation potential such a country can have to create a sustainable society. So this picture shows Norwegian ambassador to Angola, Jon Vea, and our then Minister for Development and Minister for Trade, meeting with 2 representatives from Baya in Luanda, who's building the road behind them. So business might be better than aid, but there are a few ifs. So does tax from Statoil automatically contribute to development? I suppose nobody would believe that. Statoil in Angola is, for example, dealing with a country where the president has held power for the last 35 years. There is little opposition and there is much military, to put it short. So who benefits? Why did the rich get so rich, and why did the poor get so poor? The situation is that a large percentage of citizens in countries that are rich in oil, gas, and minerals are in a way being held as hostages because they are robbed for the economical potential that could have represented a possible better future. Another example in the oil-rich country of Equatorial Guinea, where people live in poverty. The president and his family, they live like royals of the country's oil revenues, while 77% of the president's family lives as royals. So the president's son, for example, he managed to acquire an 80 million euro art collection, $1 million sports car, a Gulfstream jet, a 30 million mansion in Malibu. The U.S. Justice Department did not seem to believe that this could come from his official salary of $6,500 per month. So he was investigated for using proceeds of corruption. And they attempted to recover the stolen funds for the benefit of the people of Equatorial Guinea. But imagine that they could have a per capita income like citizens in Portugal. I suppose there are researchers on natural resources here today. I know one, Indra, our expert in Norway, who all journalists call whenever something happens, and particularly right now. Research on a resource curse shows us that the richest countries in natural resources have, with the highest dependence on such resources, they also have the most negative economic development. For example, Nigeria, in the beginning of 2000, after 40 years of oil development, Nigeria had a per capita income at the same level as they had in 1960. What increased in the country, on the other hand, was the rate of poverty. It increased from 37% to 70%. So research has told us about Dutch disease, lack of economic diversification, rent-seeking, little incentives to build institutions, big loans, few jobs, environmental costs. And on top of that, such countries often receive more international aid than compared with developing countries in the same category with the same macroeconomic and political situations. It's such a paradox. And when you Google natural resource and conflict, you will generate something like 140 million results. And it's quite evident the role natural resources can play directly or indirectly in sparking, sustaining, worsening or prolonging a conflict. So it was against this backdrop that our network was started in 2002. Our network started demanding that companies and the banks that gave loans to such companies, they should publish how much did they pay to that government. Because in 2002, all companies, they used to present their figures in bags. Asia, Africa, Latin America. There was no way that you could single out one country and see what did this company contribute to that country. There was no way a citizen could follow the money coming in from the treasure box. So no country can impose a transparency standard on another company. It's the sovereignties of countries. So the British government managed to establish a voluntary initiative in which companies, civil society, and governments could come together to talk about how they could become more transparent. There was a long process, rules being written, being dismissed by the companies, long discussion. It took years. But we ended up with the EITI Transparency Initiative, a tripartite initiative. It has two core elements. It's the process that requires for companies to publish what they pay to a country and for the countries to publish what they receive. And that should be consolidated and should be end up in a report, in an EITI report. And the implementation of this process is overseen by a multi-stakeholder group. So that's where I'm familiar with meeting more constituencies, but the positions are very diverse. And it has a mandate. So the resulting EITI reports from a period of 1999 to 2009 shows that we managed to map or to catalog around 500 billions in payments. So that's something. And including what I think is the most important thing, it's respect for civil society and that it's possible to get different actors around the same table to do a job together and discuss very difficult, problematic issues in the country. In Norway, this wasn't much of a problem because we had, quite robust institutions already. But in many other countries, this has been the only platform where civil society could meet with their governments. Many places, the first. At the same time, some people in civil society got harassed. They weren't allowed to leave the country, to get on an airplane, received threats. So it's not uncomplicated. But it allowed an international community to shed light on those situations. It doesn't mean that it changed everything else in the country. It just means that there was light on one little part. And the EITI is not a silver bullet. The previous presenter discussed that there is no recipe, and I agree, there is no silver bullet, and this is not a silver bullet. Like medicine, there's no medicine that can cure all illnesses. You need to develop specific medicine, and it takes years, and it needs to be adapted as the problem develops. So, and also, it's voluntary for countries to join in. So obviously, some of the world's biggest oil producers, don't want to join in. Why should we? And another thing, our network, we never intended this to be a voluntary thing. We want this to be in a law. We want this to be a praxis, what companies do. So after many years of political advocacy work, the EITI grew quite much bigger, and it gained a lot of resonance in very, very important countries for us. And a lot of advocacy work led into that we managed to get, well, here are the Norwegian EITI reports that just show that we also did it, the first OECD country in Norway. We managed to get a mandatory reporting, which is called the Dodd-Frank and the EU Transparency Directive. We managed to get it passed both in the US and the EU. It took many years, and it took the whole international organization to work together. So in 2010, the US signed what is called the Dodd-Frank Act, and the Section 1504, it requires oil companies in oil, gas, and mining companies that is registered with the US Securities and Exchange Commission, the stock exchange, to disclose in their annual filings what they pay to the US and also to other governments. And the law will give data that can help citizens hold their government to account for where are those money going. And the European Union ratified a similar law, the Accounting Transparency Directive, which requires disclosure, which is similar, in their 28 member countries in the EU. And there are no exemptions, which the companies wanted. Exemption for this, exemption for that, trying to come up with very strange and arbitrary arguments, which were soon dismissed. So together, this will cover 71% of the world's top 200 oil, gas, and mining companies. And Russian Lukoil will be covered by this law. But remember, this is still a minimum, an absolute minimum form of transparency. The companies have been operating for decades without publishing what they paid for those resources. Where did all the money go? It is the least we can expect from the companies that they are able to be open on what they pay to the governments. Who gives away their national resources without wanting to know what they get for it? But the oil companies obviously did not want the world to know what they paid to governments, so they fought back. And it's been a long and ugly struggle. They will not win because their arguments are not accepted. And from a Norwegian perspective, it's very hard to understand because the Norwegian company Statoil has been doing that on a voluntary basis for 10 years. The CEO in Statoil publicly said in a meeting before the American Petroleum Institute launched a litigation to the whole law. And I don't know if you can read that, but the basic, he says, has it harmed us? No. Is it a source of competitive disadvantage? No. Has it put us in a position to effectively have dialogue with NGOs and legislators? Yes. Do I think a broader industry approach along these lines would have benefited us all? That goes without saying. Still, obviously there are companies that might have more to lose on transparency than Statoil, because the American Petroleum Institute still went on with their litigation, which halted this law for the moment being. In September 2012, right after this, the American Petroleum Institute filed a lawsuit. So we see that the same companies that support the voluntary EITI initiative, which I just told you about, who are part of that tripartite process, who are also members in the board in that initiative, those same companies are fighting the same principles in law. So there are some limits to how far that process can go. And in Norway, we implement most EU legislations directly. We're not members, but we're so closely adapted to the EU that we do it still. So we see the US and the EU standard as a minimum standard for corruption. This standard, it can show what comes into the treasure box and what is received, and you can compare that. So that will address corruption, right? But how can we know that those figures are correct? If a normal person says that he or she pays this figure in tax, can you know that it's correct? Unless you're the tax authority and you know how much salary the person has, you need to relate the figure to something, to a context. Any figure in isolation is kind of meaningless. You need to relate it to something to create the meaning. So how can we know it's correct? We are mostly interested in that question. And I don't know if you're able to see the graphs here, but they're showing that calculations carried out by Global Financial Integrity, based on figures from World Bank and the OECD, shows that the estimated illicit financial flows from developing countries amounts to about 10 times the total amount given in official development assistance. Again, it's a leakage here. So large amounts stem from activities from a criminal nature, such as financing terrorism, human trafficking, arms, endangered species, natural resources, and drug trade. So this leads to enormous hidden financial flows. In addition to that, the activities in themselves pose a very great harm to society. So when we relate that to aid, we come down to this. Let's call it just the 1 to 10 problem. You give 1 Norwegian krone in aid, and you know that the country is leaking 10. So maybe we should just switch our focus a little bit more from the 1 krone that we give in aid and more to how can we stop this leakage? And how is this possible even? How can we stop such leakages? And this is what we've been concentrating on in Publish What You Pay Norway. How is this possible? The extractive industry makes use of a whole range of secrecy mechanisms that hinders insight and valuable information for national governments, for investors, for journalists, for researchers, for the society as a whole. And you do not have to be a poor developing country to be affected by this. It happens to all countries. This is why it's also important for Norway. Now I'll mention a few techniques here. Are there any accountants here present? Yeah? Okay. So I'll show how accountancy becomes very, very important. Do you know who decides what companies have to be open about and not? Who decides that? Okay. It's something called the IASB. It's a funny acronym, and it stands for the International Accounting Standards Board. It's just one of different houses or semi-private foundations that has the power to develop standards that have large financial consequences for the global market. They have people mostly from Britain and US and mostly from financial interests. It's not under political democratic control. It's been challenged by the EU precisely because who are you accountable to? And funnily enough, 60% of the financing came from the big 4 accounting companies in 2007. Do you know who the big 4 are? is the four biggest accounting companies like Deloitte, Ernst & Young, KPMG, PricewaterhouseCoopers, right? And they're so big. They have over 630,000 employees worldwide. They are everywhere. And it's seemingly something so right. Accounting, it's kind of, you figure out that everything's correct and you follow the rules. Who are the accounting standards for? Today, companies are able to organize themselves in such a way as they pay almost no tax. So while a regular citizen might pay everything from 30, 40, 50% in tax, a company can pay from almost 0 to 1 to 2% in tax in the worst cases, or up to what is a normal tax rate. But you still don't know what they should have been paying. So many companies are able to navigate around legitimate tax systems. And the point is that they are helped by someone with deep, deep knowledge, not only in one country's tax systems, but in the spaces between various countries' tax systems. Very, very smart people. So there was a hearing in the UK Parliament with a lot of profile hearings on corporate tax avoidance over the past years, and they found evidence that the big four accounting firms had contributed to this. And there was a chairwoman, Margaret Hodge, an MP, who led the hearings, and she said, "You will choose to focus on working in an area which reduce the available resources for us to build schools, hospitals, and infrastructures. To not pay tax has to do with the not contributing to the society. You don't give back." So while the big four firms that received annual revenue on over £500 million from working from the UK government, at the same time, they gave advice to companies how they could avoid the same laws. And the point is that deprives the government of taxes that everybody else has to pay. This was just the hearing I was in Norway, and it shows how such a process can happen, why they do what they do. Everybody got a little form to fill out. What shall we prioritize? What shall we not prioritize? Basically put in the bin. So the whole of the audience were auditors and working in the oil companies. And everybody seemed to prioritize what they wanted to work with, what was helpful for the companies. Remember how much the companies financed the institution. And what they did not want to work on was such as the country-by-country reporting, a transparency mechanism. And obviously, when you're not accountable and you ask the people you receive the financing from, would you have gotten another result if you had asked others? And who are these accounting standards for? You know, are they for the companies themselves, or are they for a society at large? There are journalists here, more journalists than accountants. There was one accountant. How many journalists are there here? 1, 2. Okay, a good few. Yeah. So we wanted to know just how are the oil, gas and mining companies organizing themselves to avoid tax? What can we find out about that? So we decided to look at 10 of the largest oil, gas and mining companies and to see how many subsidiary companies, how many daughter companies do they operate with, and where are they? And what we found was that 10 of the largest oil, gas and mining companies in the world, they use 6,000 subsidiaries together. 6,000. And this is not even everything. This is the top of the iceberg. We did not, it's important for me to say that we did not have any insight at all. We only trawled filings in stock exchanges in the US, in Toronto, to find what did the companies themselves file. So this is the top of the iceberg. This is at least figure. Because the point is obviously that more of these companies, they do not file. And the second most interesting finding was that 1/3 of these companies were placed in so-called tax havens. Are you familiar with the term tax haven? Everybody? Okay, so the question is, why would you need 6,000 subsidiaries? So why do you need to channel something through a tax haven? What exact kind of services are given in a tax haven? When companies are using a secrecy jurisdiction, it means that no government in the world is able to see the whole picture on what is going on with these companies. You can see what is going on to here, and the point of a secrecy jurisdiction is to cut the information flow, basically. There is no definition on what it is, but it makes everybody see just small pieces of puzzle. You don't see the whole puzzle. You only have one piece here, one piece there, one piece there. You don't have the full picture. So in Norway, we can sit with one little puzzle piece and think, how does that little picture look? And we just had the largest court case in Norway with the company Transocean, where they tried to test how did that bigger picture look by looking at one of those small pieces. So since there are no definition, we tried to make a homemade definition, which is that secrecy jurisdictions offer law structures which are especially designed to help conceal information about activities and ownership which explicitly concern other states and particularly harm and undermine national and international regulation and level of democracy. So a tax haven or a secrecy jurisdiction, which is the most precise terminology to use, will say that, well, we're sovereign. You know, nobody can tell us what to do. But what they are doing in praxis is that they are interfering in other countries' sovereignty by not giving access to where they have a duty to provide that information. So what is an offer in a secrecy jurisdiction? What do they sell? Well, it's about creating an appearance of international legitimacy. It's about creating a form which is quite different than a substance or the effect that you achieve by using it. And it disguises who owns a company, who are the real owner. When the boat Scandinavian Star had an accident, hundreds of people died, and they wanted to know who's liable for this scandal where so many people died. They couldn't find the owner. Who's the owner? Who can be held responsible? And there are numerous cases where this has quite direct effect on human people's life, and it's about control of capital. So when we trawled these filings, there was a picture that popped up. I think it was not intended to pop up, but suddenly it was there. And this is not something companies usually do. And it's just a small picture from Barrick Gold Corporation. So I'll just use this as an illustration. So they had put this up showing how a formal company structure might look. And what you see there on the top, you might think that that's the headquarters, like all the money is, or when you look at the bottom line here, is there a pointer or something? The black thing? Yeah. But if you just, this one? Yeah. Yeah. Anyhow, if you look at the bottom line there, the bottom line, the bubbles there, you can think that that could be the source country where the resources are. It could be Norway, it could be Nigeria, it could be another country. And you might think that the money is going up, 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 and then you come to the square on the top, which is the headquarter, and out from there it creates dividends to investors, and then you earn from what you produce. But it's not the way it's going on. A lot of money is just reinvested into the structure, and if you then slice this picture in 3 halves, you can put those companies into the 1/3, which is in tax havens. And in addition to that, there are a lot of companies outside this chart which will never show up. So also an investor will never get the money of the true production which is taking place. An investor will get dividends based on a mathematical formulation on what the company thinks that the investor will be happy with. So you talked about yesterday about propaganda last evening. So I can just share with you that governments are not the only ones into using propaganda. So this is one company, Chevron, going out and saying all companies should put their profits to good use. We agree. What we found was, in our investigation, was that Chevron is the most opaque company amongst all the companies. And 62% of Chevron's 77 subsidiaries are incorporated in secrecy jurisdictions. So I'm sure they're putting their profits to good use for themselves. What does that mean for society? What does that mean for us? What does that mean for the market? That means that a lot of capital is locked in to secrecy jurisdictions. This is capital which is not being reinvested into the market. This is capital that is built up in so-called war chests that a company will use when they want to buy up another company, or they have to pay an environmental fee when there is an environmental disaster. It would be cheaper for them perhaps to just pay a fee than to do everything else that they should have been doing. And when we think about another fact, that 60% of today's world trade is taking place within multinational corporations or within a company, within the corporate structure. What does that mean? That means that a huge part of the world capital, it's taking place across national borders within the company. And that means that another point becomes very, very important. It's the concept of transfer pricing. The prices you set between the same company. When you're a company, you're supposed to have this arm-length distance and behave as if you're dealing with somebody else when you, in reality, are dealing with yourself. So, to the extent that parts of taxable profits can be moved out of a country, it directly affects the country in question, and it's significantly important to a country's tax base. Russia has also questioned this. I think there will be coming out an interesting OECD report in October, November, and I heard that also Russia has taken a great interest in this report when they look a bit more into these questions. So obviously the prerequisite is a veil of opacity, and the problem is that how can a government know what is legal and illegal? It's the same secrecy that protects all the transactions. And what we found was that 100 billion had just disappeared through tax to transfer pricing. So this was an expert in transfer pricing. Basically, you have a big machine, you put in a lot of numbers from the US and the EU, and out on the other hand, you see that where did all this money go? And nobody really lifted an eyebrow. Still, there was 100 billion gone. So trade with crude oil, that is one aspect of the extractive industry. But trade does not have to be connected to the physical takeout of the oil from the ground or the mining. It doesn't have to be traded with physical extraction. You can also shift profits using complex financial instruments. And there are many of those. The creativity is endless. We also learned more about that during the financial crisis. All of the products that was sold, these are inventions, these are products being sold. So one of the perhaps most complicated financial instruments, which are an integrated part of the global financial system and the extractive industries, is the use of derivatives. And by using that instrument, you can move a lot of money between countries. In one case, a company managed to move 20% of its taxable profit out of a country. 20%. That's a lot of money. So the investor Warren Buffett, he termed the derivatives as financial weapons of mass destruction. And in the report, we found that the value, when you calculate the value behind all the derivatives, it's 10 times the world GDP. 10 times the world GDP. It's blown up. It's absurd. So a question being asked international right now is has tax become a voluntary thing for companies? Can we just say, we don't want to pay tax, we want to become a taxless paying company or a non-taxable company? So, with the assistance of professional tax advisors with deep knowledge in the distinction with different countries' tax systems and law systems, they can pursue advanced and aggressive tax planning across national borders. And avoiding tax has become a global industry. We have the accounting companies, but we also have lawyers. And they're not so famous yet, but we're trying to make them famous, some of them, for what they do. Because lawyers, they have something called a legal privilege. There are lawyers in here, aren't there? I could see it from the brochure. But extractive companies has become quite clever in using lawyers because they have a legal privilege. They are not allowed to say what they're a part of. So when a company diversify their legal advice, they're able to get this advice from that place, and this advice from that place, and this advice from that place. And together, nobody knows really what the others are doing, and nobody can tell what they've been a part of. So the companies have access to all information they need. It's only the tax authorities and the investors that does not have this information. So legal privilege also hinder insight and is used strategically. We also could see that unfold in the Norwegian lawsuit, which was filed against the company Transocean, the world's biggest rig company in Norway. There is also another quite interesting example. Norwegian oil companies can now, according to a ruling in the Supreme Court of Norway, have protection under human rights using the principle of self-incrimination that prevents oil companies that the public can have insight. So the Supreme Court has decided that the forced disclosure of key financial information to the police should be prevented. And this should raise some interesting question on basic human rights. What happens when basic human rights are being developed to protect oil companies from insight in how they manage the country's resources? what happens when extractive companies that have built up financial muscles in the tax havens, in the secrecy jurisdictions, they can run as long as court cases as they want to, have access to as many lawyers as they want to, and they can get right in a court system. If you have all the means, you're more likely to get right. For ordinary citizens like myself, it's very disturbing to think that human rights should protect oil companies. I thought they were invented as something that should protect us, human beings, after the war. So obviously, developing countries don't stand a chance in the face of this. And I don't think Norway has much of a chance with all of this. Some things we have control over, other things we do not. The fiction industry is a word that we use when we see all of this working together, all of these mechanisms being played out together. For example, the World Bank looked at 200 cases of corruption where 70% had used anonymous shell companies. And financial institutions and secrecy jurisdictions, they're complicit in moving capital across borders that should accrue to a home country and transfer it to a company in a secrecy jurisdictions. So should journalists have to risk their lives and litigations when trying to get access to key information, when they're trying to follow the money? We have a program where we look closer at the whole value chain and the problems of transparency and what we can do about the different issues. But, for example, if you're the journalist Christian Sarita Ron and his colleague here, Christian was in our program. He used his knowledge. He found oil contracts via the tax haven of Panama and leading up to the president's brother in Ecuador, Rafael Correa. Obviously, the president was furious. He had already 18 court cases running against many media, so he was not the only one. But the president actually sued him for $10 million US. And when you're a journalist on a normal journalist salary in Ecuador, that's absurd. And he received threats. So what do you do? Isn't it better that this information is just open in the public? Is this what we have to risk in order to know where the money is going? In Publish What You Pay Norway, we thought that the US rule and the EU rule, where we know what the company pay, what the government receive, it's not enough. We need to know the context. So the reporting must be meaningful, and we call that the extended country-by-country reporting. That's what we want Norway to do. So the tax payments need to be presented in a context. And also, it should not be arbitrary figures presented. It should be numbers from the financial account. Isn't that logical? We thought that was logical. Investors think it's logical. Most people think it's logical. Politicians think it's logical. Even when we've been speaking to the financial departments and oil companies, unofficially, they think it's logical. It's just not happening. This is just for if there were any particularly accounting interested people, but if anybody's interested, I can go down, sit down afterwards and talk more about it. The point is, where are we in Norway on this law? So that's how it feels, and an illustrator tried to visualize that. It's kind of a hinder after hinder after hinder, and then you have big oil in the background there with the litigation. You have the accounting companies trying to, we're pen friends with the Ministry of Finance, and so are the accounting companies and the lawyers. So it's kind of a race going on. And I feel we're kind of a little bit ahead right now, but it's obviously uphill. This is all in Norwegian, but I just wanted to show it because visually it says all the green at the bottom That is what we have managed to achieve in Norway. That is how far we've gotten. We've gotten the US and the EU rule, and in addition to that, to the right, we have more. We have the context. We have the context that we want to. But there are three problems now. It's just that we want the cost, because companies, they love costs. Costs are the best a company can have. That's not in place yet. And it's also not accounting figures. And it's not all the countries, only where the companies have the physical extraction of oil. Basically, we don't get the information from the tax havens. So those three issues are what we're going to work with this year and beyond. So just to show our arguments is that if you use accounting figures, that's audited figures, it's reliable, it's cost effective, why shall regular audited figures be held away from a financial statement? And the most logical and effective place to find financial information is from the audited accounts. It's already audited. You don't have any extra cost. And you can just put any information into notes to the account. We do not want a glossy CSR report. We just want a simple, effective financial reporting. In Norway, they did not include what they termed support functions. We've been pen friends with the Minister of Finance for years now, but they turned the tax havens for support functions. But in reality, these are obviously the main functions for corruption and capital flight. So why should the main functions be exempted from this reporting? And we go out in the media and we talk about this and talk about this and talk about this and trying to redefine what this is really about. So I'm quite optimistic. So basically we're trying to get all the puzzle pieces together. That's what we're doing. And then we're trying to share it in programs, and we're doing information work on it, and we're trying to produce reports about how this is going on. And now I want to, is there sound to this system? Oops, is there sound? Anybody know? Yeah, there. Because there is a 2 minutes video. I might show you if you have the sound. If not,
it might be some. Oh, actually, this might be it.
let's try. We only see heads talking, but we don't hear what they're saying. Shall we try again and see if we can get them talking with a voice? She's asking who is the taxpayer, you know, when Starbucks or Google can pay 2% tax and you have to pay 30% of tax. We're not getting the voice here, so I don't know if it's useful to see it too. Strange. Hmm? If it not works, I'll just leave it, but let's see. No. I'm not getting the voice of this, but we had a conference in 2012 where we looked at the financial secrecy, the effect on society, and the vested interests. So we had top experts from the whole world, and this is small snippets of what they said. Yeah. So we wanted to make a film about it, basically. So I wanted to end with that, but I didn't get their voice and everything they said, and that's what's cool. So I think we'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Итак, коллеги, очень интересная презентация.
Colleagues, I think it was a very interesting presentation. By the way, there is a booklet describing this project if you are interested. Now you may ask questions and make your comments.
I'm not an expert in accounting, but I'm an expert in financial and utility sector. Colleagues, some objections, if I may.
Sure.
Do you know the life cycle of oil and gas industry? It's about 30 years. How many times tax rate are changed in country through 30 years? The risk of oil company in such country as Russia, Nigeria is large. For example, Statoil lose $2 billion in Stockman. They have no revenue, zero. The revenue of Statoil in Stockman, zero. They spent $2 billion. The next objection. How you pay for this bottle of water? For half a liter of water, it's about €1. And how many you pay for 1 liter of gasoline? In Russia, it's about $1. In Europe, it's about €2 per liter. And it's quite simple to produce still water. It's business plan of company that produce water is about 6 months, 7 months. To produce gasoline, it's 2 or 3 very complex engineering project with a huge risk. It's projects that life cycle of this project about 30 years. So when some people calculate effective tax rates that it's about 1 or 2%, they don't calculate EBITDA, for example, the earnings before interest and tax and plus depreciation and amortization. And they don't calculate, for example, inflation. The dollar 30 years ago, when the company has a large capital expenditure, is not equal to the dollar in nowadays. And it's not equal in a dollar of 10 years later. So when we speak about effective tax rate, please, it's a very complex problem. And for example, we have a lot of good consulting research, like Cambridge Energy Researchers Association, that know a lot of facts about oil and gas, and it's not a very simple problem. It's not just a tax avoidance. And the last one, the function of business is not providing schools or medical help for the civilians. The function of oil and gas company and utilities company to extract oil and to produce to provide you the service of electricity and gasoline, and you pay for this. Thanks.
Итак, Мона, пожалуйста.
So, Mona, please, I suggest that you should object to aggressive Russian capitalism. Please, will you like to object?
No, I mean, I will agree, yeah, but to some, not all. Because, yes, exploration of natural resources is very, very costly in the beginning. It takes many, many years before you get a cash flow, yes. But in Norway, we tax over 70%, and we still have companies there. Also, the difference between water and oil, there might be a bigger race for water in the future than we have right now, unfortunately. We can live without oil. We cannot live without water. I don't have anything to contribute to that, really. When it relates to the company, and their role in society. Yes, they shall create profits. The point is that no company operates in a vacuum. A company will get access to a natural resource. A company is given the right to exploit a natural asset. The natural resources belongs to a state. The state represents its citizens. So citizens and the state are concerned how a company manages the resources it has gotten access to. That's all. We're also concerned with reducing risk and reducing conflicts and increasing long-term returns. We're also held as a premises as a company should follow a country's law, not to pay millions in order to learn how to avoid a company's law. That is a difference. And that is what I'm interested in. We all want value creation. We all want workplaces. We all want businesses. But it's vital to uncover and identify the mechanisms by which companies may move untaxed profit out of a country before it's being taxed, because that directly hurts the country's economic base. So if I was the leader of Russia, I would be pretty concerned if somebody's able to take 20% of my profit away from me.
Продолжаем. Денис
We continue. Denis Burakov now has the floor. Indeed, Denis Burakov. Well, first of all, I would like to say that for me, the problem of... Can you hear the translation, please? Yes. I would like to start with saying that for me, the problem of the resource curse is one of the main problems, because I'm confident that this is one of the obstacles that stands in the way to create democratic institutions in Russia. I would like to speak with criticism of what you just told us, and I would like to introduce our audience into this theme of curse. And then I would like you to ask a question, the same question that I asked Larry Diamond, who came up with an interesting method how to address this problem. First, what you are saying, transparency and publication of all income and revenue, certainly it's very important. This is where I agree with you. But what we know about how much the state gets and pays will not allow us to address this problem, resolve this problem, because the problem of resources curse, it's not an economic or financial problem, it's a political problem, because it is about political elites. What they do is economic distribution of revenue, that is, if the politician comes into government, he certainly influences the economic distribution of resources. This is how it works. And many academicians agree upon this. Thus, I would like right now to suggest three ways how to address this problem. These were suggestions in the literature. First method is pretty much simple. There's nothing difficult, sophisticated to leave oil reserves in the soil. In this case, we can keep them, and for the future it will be a long-term investment. Here, I suppose none of those present here will believe that somebody will do it right now. Yeah? The second way to resolve this problem, this is something that your country created. And if I'm not mistaken, this is the way it works in Botswana also. Oil revenues are distributed through a certain fund, which puts it into investment, and this fund has nothing to do with the state. This is method number 2. And the third method, which is, I think, is most interesting, and you may have heard about it, it's the English, is oil-to-cash approach. It means that oil is converted into cash. It's very simple. It has to do with direct distribution of all revenues between people and the government. I can describe it in the following matter. Oil revenues are divided 50%. 50% goes to the state, the remaining 50% goes to the people. and it goes to their bank accounts. It means that every person, every citizen, every month receives some revenue from selling and is taxed for that. He pays tax on this. And economists make the calculations how much this percentage, how much this tax should be so that we do not give rise to inflation. And when I talked to Larry Diamond, who last year published a very interesting article in the Foreign Affairs on this, I wanted to ask him this question. Can you change the structure of economic distribution of oil revenues under authoritarian rule? Or can this only be done after the country turns into democracy? I won't tell you the answer that Larry gave me because I would be very interested to hear what you say first. And yes, this is about it. Thank you very much for your attention.
There are many comments here. I don't know if it's useful that I address all of them, because what I'm really concerned about here, it's to inform that the problems are interlinked between the problems of corruption, transfer mispricing, derivative abuse, tax regulation abuse, and other types of abuse. And you can add to that, you know, all the different political realities and abuses going on. This is just the kind of technical financial mechanisms that make everything possible. You know, if you're going to do something bad, you need someone to help you, basically. That's what I'm talking about here. So, and it's a massive problem. It affects many countries. And what we're suggesting here is not what to do with it. What we say is that if you have the facts on the table, how much you're losing and where the leakages are, would you like to know that? That's what we're saying. We're not saying what you do with that. So it's up to civil society or up to tax authorities or up to researchers to have an opinion. What's best for my country? What should we do with that in my country? This is just to get the facts on the table, where the leakages is, how big it is, and where it's happening. So what you do with it, that's up to you. And how to change distribution in a country, in different countries, I don't think I can answer that. That's not my background. It's not up to me to say. I think there are many people here who will have much more knowledge into that than I. So, and also it's more a question of distribution, what you do after on. So we're not really touching upon that. We're just saying that there are leakages. Pardon? Yeah, but we don't know. I have no clue, to be honest, what Russia shall do or shall not do. Up to you.
Так, продолжаем. Константин.
So we continue. Konstantin. Konstantin Krylov from St. Petersburg. Speaks English.
It's fantastic what you've said, and it's very interesting. And I have one question. In your opinion, post-war Europe saw several attempts to increase the taxes or increase tax pay discipline, but almost all these attempts were destroyed by the situation when France, for example, trying to make attempts in this direction, but you know, Germany, Jamaica, Brazil made the steps in completely different direction, and this is this cage where oil or other international corporation could take their money and put in the most profitable place. can we solve this problem? Because, in my opinion, it's the most important problem in our globalizing world, when you can do everything that you can in one country, but your neighborhood destroy all your attempts because he put his taxes in 1%. Thank you.
They're so good questions, and I can't answer them all. You know, your questions are better than my. I could never answer them, but I think that looking at what we managed to achieve in our network, when 800 organizations and all those who help and support and in their different ways try to help us, we have actually gotten a law in the US. We have actually gotten a law in the EU. And that has been many, many, many years working across countries. So I think that working in a network, it's very important, because then you have the first-hand information on what's going on, and you have all this homegrown local familiarity to the narratives that the different countries use in order to promote or to hinder a certain wanted development. And it's possible to all the time. And I think that many times politicians doesn't know. One of our best friends are the investors. If you are an investor, you want to have control over where you invest your money. And companies are concerned with who will invest in me. You know, what is my reputation? Not all companies. There are state companies who can care less also, and also very, very small companies that does not care so much about it. But I think that working together across countries and on the same levels that the companies are working on, both local and regional and national and international. And yes, it's a huge problem. Just witnessing policy formation in the EU is quite amazing. And but what we learned when we got there was that policymakers were actually pretty happy to have us there, because they were saying that, you know, each day we have lobbyists from the industry, we have accountants, and they want to sit on our lap while we write rules. And now you come with new information, and you have facts, and you have evidence, and we need that. So they were pretty happy about that. And we experienced a quite open process where we could feed into that process. And I think that that was very important. But it is the work both in country as a node in a much larger network and sharing that information across that made this possible. And I think that it's easy to think, and particularly on a bad day when you have a setback or a litigation or something, that changing the world is unthinkable. But all it takes is an idea, and you often have to couple it with facts and evidence, of course, but ideas can change the way we perceive the world. It's like the Danish astronomer, like Tycho Brahe, he was trying to figure out, how does the world look? Where is everything connected? Trying to understand the order of the world, thinking that the Earth was the center of the world and everything, you know, swirled around us somehow. And then it was challenged. You know, when Kepler came along and he saw that, okay, the sun is more important, and trying to reorder, redefine, and seeing everything through a different idea, and it really recreated, you know, the whole perception of how we envision the world. So I think that in many ways we have never had a better chance to change the world than we have right now, because we have so many ideas, we have had so many new facts that has been popping up from all of these countries, and evidence, and seeing the connection between different harmful activities practiced across many different disciplines. And I think that, you know, there is no, we cannot have a certainty about what the future will be like where we go to. The future is something we create each day and together and here and sharing ideas. So it's just small contribution and dots and knots trying to be connected together. I don't know if I answered your question at all, actually, now.
Пожалуйста, сударыня, вам слово.
Lady, you now have the floor. As far as I understood, thank you very much for your presentation. As far as I got from your presentation, please remember to give your name. Anna Baydakova from Moscow, I'm sorry. As far as I understood part one of your presentation, your purpose is to obtain information both from oil producing companies as well as from governments of the countries where these countries operate and where they pay taxes and where they invest money, and to give us examples of African countries where there's high level of corruption and how you succeed in, or maybe where you fail probably, convincing the governments of those countries to provide you information, because it's obvious that they were reluctant to do so. For example, what is your success rate? How often do you obtain information in the countries where the economy is not transparent? How good are they in opening this information and disclosing it to you?
Well, I think there are large international successes, such as the establishment of the EITI, for example, where we have over 30 countries that are members of the EITI, and which a company annually will report its figures, and it's possible to consolidate those figures. And we can ask questions on, so why did we have so much revenues this year and not so much revenues that year? So we can ask questions, with such a report. We can use those reports so we can see what does, for example, an EITI report generate. But that is what comes into the treasure box and what is received in a treasure box. So those countries where there are figures, we can analyze now. But the country-by-country reporting in the US and the EU has not come into effect yet, because that has to be in an accounting year where a company has to start reporting, the year after. So we haven't been able to test what is coming out of that yet. But, for example, with the extended country-by-country reporting that we promote, we can, for example, say that, given an example, that I can say that if we knew this, you could know that. I don't know quite what you want to know, how we can use the actual economical data. That's a bit limited, but if it's about how we talk to the different stakeholders.
Yes, what I'm asking about really, it's what arguments do you use to convince the governments of the countries, including corrupted countries, to provide you information, to share this information with you? What arguments do you use? How do you succeed in make them disclose the data, given that the economy is intransparent and they're hardly ever willing to disclose this data? What arguments do you use?
I wish I could have the whole argument book, but I think that would always be very specific to the context and to the concrete situation. But one thing that we learned is that many investors, they're keen to know where their money is going. And as an investor, your job is to follow your own money and to make sure you make a profit of it. So if you know that you're not getting what you should have been getting, we've been noting that investors are quite concerned about that. So in Norway, there are many investors supporting us. And also in the creation of the EITI, we had the support of the investors. So the investors were actually a very important group for us to connect with. And also, if a country is losing money, I mean, even a leader would be interested in knowing if there are leakages. But it's not easy, it's not so that we can only go to a country or go to Angola and say, hey, you should do this and that. It's kind of, everything is a very, very long process. And I think also that through that process and through that collaboration with many actors, it happens in such a specific process. So it's very hard to say that this is the argument or that is the argument, but on a general basis, it helps to show which harms it has on society. In some countries, they don't care much about what happens, which is very, very evident. In other countries, they're more more open to seeing the harms it has on societies and on business and how it can affect a reputation. But using knowledge from, there are obviously accounting people, and lawyers who see these problems as well. So using deep knowledge and connecting to expert environments is also very, very important, and connecting with the politicians. And many times the parliaments or parliamentarians, they don't have any insight or overview or knowledge about these things themselves. So actually they also need to know. And many times they don't have access to reading the deals that the countries are doing. They don't have any information themselves. So, but I can sit down and talk more about this, but I don't have any short and brief answer to that question. It's a very good question. And,
Так, нефтегазовое лобби, пожалуйста.
Oil and gas lobby, please, you now have the floor. Thank you. Olga Fadzeeva from Khanty-Mansi district. This is where they make most of Russian oil. I live in a district where very large oil resources and oil-producing companies work, amongst them some of the companies that you mentioned in your presentation. You spoke about reporting, about law, about transparency. I have no doubt whatsoever that we have very good lawyers in oil companies. The reporting is certainly there, and transparency is certainly ensured, and even legality is there. But apart from that, oil companies spend huge amounts of money on charity, and their social sphere, they're supporting environmental problems and conservation problems. Politics too. Environmental policy, I'm sorry, not politics, environmental policy. But given that environmental policy is pursued in such a manner that in 2012, for example, we 2 times had, when the highways were blocked by indigenous local communities because of oil pollution, and they cannot continue to live in their traditional way of life as a small indigenous people. So huge money is certainly spent, but no effect whatsoever is seen by the locals. Charity in terms of social sphere, huge money is allocated to support, I do not know, construction. In our city, for example, they built a small, say, crossing area for 300 million rubles, and we tried to, as a civil society, to get to know about this. However, the law bars us from doing so, because legislation of the Russian Federation works in such a manner that you cannot audit, as a civil society, you cannot audit how the money was spent, the money that was given to the donation. It's only the sponsor that has the right of access to this information, where the money went. Yes, the reporting is there, transparency is there, the law is there, but in all probability the laws were written in such a way so that somebody finds it profitable. What I wanted to give you an example as a comment, and to audit at the level of the state, nobody can do it. Probably we shall somehow cooperate with you. Maybe you will give us a hint how civil society can influence this situation. Thank you.
yeah, it's unfortunately that situation is not unique. You know, companies do spend a lot on CSR, corporate social responsibility. That's PR and propaganda, or call it what you know. You saw the ad here, and you're absolutely right. There is no transparency on it. So we're also demanding in Norway that we want to know what Statoil is spending on CSR. I mean, we love the talented piano player, but we don't want Statoil to sponsor it. You know, it's not Statoil's business to to do such things. Or where the money's coming from, but because we're thinking that maybe they're just writing off the tax. Maybe it's I'm paying the campaign, the CSR, because it's a cost and they can write it off. You know, we want to know. So we were actually working on that in our own country right now. And also and that is something companies are doing a lot of. You know, they're making these glossy and nice CSR reports with smiling people from a community and pictures of a school or a project. And we're not very impressed by that. We want to know the hard facts, the monies, and the accounts, and they need to publish it themselves. We shall not be in the complete blank about what they're spending on what. And I think it's also difficult when they do that, because there are zones that obviously should be no-go zones. You know, the environment is too vulnerable. There are people living there who cannot, their money is the nature, you know, and it should be like that. So it's a very, very huge and complex area. And also in Latin America, it's more focused on leave it in the ground, as was mentioned here, which is it's very logical. When you see all the harm on the environment, nobody sees any benefits, you don't know where the money's going, obviously it's easy to understand.
Юра, на что вы рассчитываете?
Yura, what are you counting upon?
Particularly in the EITI process, that is a new demand within that process right now. Yeah.
Коллеги, мы...
Dear colleagues, we're about to wrap up where there's time before lunch with a very interesting session and very curious experience. And we've got every reason to congratulate our expert on her first presentation here, as well as thank her. Please. Thank you very much. The meeting adjourns. Enjoy your meal. We'll reconvene at 2:30.